Okay, hello everyone, and I'm glad you've downloaded my Skin Retouching Action Pack. And in this video, what I want to do is I just want to show a quick way I use my frequency separation action in my own workflow. And I'm going to be using this, I'm going to be retouching this photo. The action pack has got 10 different actions. It's got the dodge action, it's got the burn action, then it's also got the dodge and burn action, and then the frequency separation 16-bit. So usually I shoot in RAW, and when I'm editing, I'm usually editing in 16-bit. And when you look up here, you see it on the screen. It says 16-bit. So this action is kind of designed for 16-bit. If your image is in 8-bit, you can easily, come up here to image, to mode, and change it to 16-bit. It's always recommended to edit in 16-bit. So I always edit all my images in 16-bit. So to use the frequency separation action, all you need to do is come to the action, click on it, and press continue. Then it takes you to the point where you need to select the radius. Usually I think you could start from 0, and what we're trying to do here is we're trying to separate the skin texture from the skin tone. The high layer is where the skin textures and the skin details are going to be saved. The low layer is where we're going to have only the skin color and the skin tone. So the point of frequency separation is separating the texture from the tones or from the color, high and low. So to do it correctly, first of all, with this box, I click here, or I click somewhere where I know that there is textures on the skin. For example, when you look at this one, when I click here, maybe somewhere here is, I go to a place where I know that there is some details. Then I start to, you see, then I start to move this up slowly. At some point, I think this image was shot wide open, so there's a bit of depth of field going on here. So I'm just going to go to a place where I know that there's texture on the skin, and I keep taking it up, and I keep taking it up, and I keep taking it up, I keep taking it up. At this point, now I'm at 4.5.0. If you look carefully, before and after, if you look carefully, before, after, before, after, before, after, I don't know if you can see the difference, but this is without the radius, and now this is with the blur. So I've successfully at this point gotten to a point that the texture is no longer in the image. It's at this point I press OK. For every image, this radius changes, It's not a fixed number. So 5.0 might work for this image, and 5.0 might not work for another image. So it's something you need to use your eyeballs to see for yourself. You go to an area where you know that there is texture. For example, this section, this section, for example, and you just kind of check it. Just manually check it before, like, for example, before, after, you see. For this particular image, I think 5.0 is going to be fine. So at this point, I press OK. Gaussian blur does this thing. It has successfully created my frequency separation. It has successfully created the frequency separation folder. If I'm also going to note, usually before I get to my frequency separation, I've done my healing first of all. First of all, I've done my healing, because that's always the first step. The first step is to first of all clean up the skin, because frequency separation is not designed for skin cleaning. Frequency separation is technically designed to just even out the skin and make the skin more even. But the hard work of skin, cleaning should be done on a separate layer, which is going to be called healing, usually with the stamp clone, with the healing brush is what I used to do that. The healing brush is what I used to do that. But I mean, since this video is really not about healing, I just want to show how the frequency separation works, current and below. So I'm going to skip this for now, you know, but just to mention it, usually you want to have healed the skin, remove the blemishes and all that before you get to the frequency separation part. So now we're in the frequency separation part. It's got technically the high frequency layer, which has got the textures. It's got the low frequency, which has got the colors. Then there's a copy of this here, because what I do is I never ever edit directly on my low frequency layer. I always edit on a copy of it, just in case there's any error. I can easily come here and delete it. I can easily come here, delete it, and work on and create a new copy of the low frequency and work on that one. But generally, something I'll never do is I'll never edit directly on the low frequency. I always work on the low copy. So that's why the action has automatically got a low copy created. This low copy is exactly the same as this low frequency, but it's just a copy of this low frequency. So it's a good habit to always create a copy of the low frequency. So now we've got the low frequency. Then there's a color layer, which usually is blank. And this color layer is a layer where, while you're doing your mixing and working on low skin tone, and sometimes we just use this color layer to blend in the skin. Sometimes on this same color layer I use the healing. On this color layer I come here, sometimes, because the mixer brush is usually the last thing I want to use. So when it's possible to not use the mixer brush, I actually don't really like to use the mixer brush, because the mixer brush is a very, it easily makes the skin look like plastic. So sometimes I come on this color layer and I actually do my healing, which is not recommended. I always recommend to do the healing from the very first beginning. You see, this is before and this is after, before and after. For example, I could also take a brush. It's called color because what I could do is I could take a brush, 1% flow, very low flow, and just to even out, let me make this bigger. Just to even out, some of this skin, I could just take a brush, very soft brush, zero hardness, take the hardness to 0, and select a color that I like, a color that is good for the skin. Maybe select somewhere here. Then what I'm doing now is I'm just going to use this brush and kind of brush it into the skin. It's below the texture layer, so by the time I'm going to unhide this texture layer. In fact, let's be sure that, okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking part of this skin and I'm going to brush it here. I'm going to brush it slowly into this place. Maybe 1% is kind of too slow, but you see, before, after, before, after, before, after, you see? I mean, what I'm doing now is just a very rough, just to show how this frequency separation layer works. I mean, usually I wouldn't really use it like this. This is a bit extreme, but you see what the color is doing, and I've not even brought in the mixer brush. This is probably extreme, but you get the point. So I go here, I go to erase. Usually what this does is, anytime there is a difference in, maybe a color shift, or the neck is yellow and this is, and you need to just kind of balance the two colors. Sometimes I use the color layer And so back to the low frequency copy. Back to the low frequency copy. This now has the skin colors, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to even out, all the skin colors and the blemishes, and just try to make it look smooth. But we're not trying to make it look like plastic, you know. So usually, some people just go in with a mixer brush and then just start mixing and mixing and mixing. But if you do that, the ending result looks very, you know, not so nice. Like what I'm doing now, I'm just going in with my mixer brush, just mixing, mixing it how I like it. This is wrong. This is the wrong way to do it. The result is going to look very plastic and not good, you know, going like this, do this, this is going to be ridiculous at the end. Shit, my laptop is so fucked up. Okay, so, something like this, something like this, something like this. This is total bullshit. Before, after, before, after, you see, this is already kind of fucked up. So, this is wrong, and I'm going to delete. So now, when you look at it, I've kind of fucked up this layer like this. The beautiful thing is I didn't do it directly on this. I didn't do it directly on this low frequency layer. Let me see the details in this stuff. Mm, okay. So, one benefit now is I done it on a low copy. So, I mean, to make any correction, all I need to do is go delete my low copy and create Command J and create a new low frequency copy. So basically, with this, we're back to, square one without having, to start the whole process again. Because imagine if I'd worked on my high frequency and then I do something wrong, then I have to delete the entire frequency separation and run it again. But with a copy, if I'm working on just a copy, if anything goes wrong, I delete that copy and create a new copy and work on that copy. So it's always good to always work on copies. So how do I use my low frequency? With my mixer brush, I found these settings to be the best for me. The settings are brush wetness, 2% wet, 5% load, 2% mix, then this remains zero, this remains zero. Then my flow usually is about 15%. Sometimes if I'm in a big rush, I take it to 30%, but usually it goes from 15 to 30, depending on what I'm working on. But if anything, usually what I change is my flow. Usually I leave my wetness, my load, my mix, I usually leave them as they are. And what I change from time to time is just my flow. So what I do is I get my mixer brush and 0% hardness. Then I'm just looking to mix the skin to even out the skin tone. We need to remember that the skin tone contains highlights, which is somewhere here. The skin tone contains highlights. Let me get this out. Alright, so the skin tone contains highlights like somewhere like this has got highlights, somewhere like this has got highlights, and somewhere like this has got highlight, and the skin tone contains shadows. Somewhere like this has got, let me change the color of the shadows. Okay, somewhere like this has got shadows, somewhere like this has got shadows, even some shadows here, and where else, there's some shadows, there's some shadows here and shadows here, and then it's got the midtones. The midtones, let's use gray for the midtones. Yes, and let's say the midtone somewhere here, somewhere here. The midtones are like neutral colors. All right. When I'm mixing, so back to the mixer brush. Usually when I'm mixing, I want to make sure that my mixer brush, I'm only mixing in the midtones with the midtones, right? I'm only mixing, I'm only mixing, all right. So I'm only mixing the midtones with the midtones, something like this. I'm going to mix this midtone with this midtone, mixing this. I'm never going to drag this and take it into the highlight. Mix the midtones with the midtones, mix the highlights with the highlights, you know, something like that, something like that, something like that, nothing too crazy. The point is just making the skin just a little more even, you know. The major work should have been done in the healing layer and in the initial dodge, macro dodge and burn, because also before this layer, before I get my frequency separation, I also do my macro dodge and burn, and usually that has done most of the work, and the frequency separation is just like the finishing touch of what I've already started. Mixing it, trying to not flatten the skin but just even out the skin tones. That's the point of this whole thing. So some areas usually do not need a lot of mixing. For example, this area seems fine. This area seems fine. So here I don't need to do so much. I'm just going to do very little. Just try to just smoothen out the skin, even it. You see, before, after. I'm not sure if you see it after, before, after. Ignore this part. I mean, ignore the forehead, because usually, you should have healed all this before you get to this point. But if you look here, you see, before mixing, after, this is as far as my mixing would usually go. Not too far, because I'm not trying to turn the skin into plastic. Something like this for me, this is as far, for this image, this is as far as my skin mixing would go. I'm just trying to even it out a bit, but I'm not trying to wipe it out. So I just keep mixing and mixing, and also I come to the shadow area. I probably reduce my brush now to the size of the area, then I mix the shadow area with the shadow area. I'm not going to take the shadow area from here then start mixing into the highlights. That would be a bit crazy. So I'm going to make sure that my mixing brush is also the size of the shadow area, and there are still different gradients. Even though it's the shadow area, there's still different gradients of colors. So I'm also paying attention to the gradient of colors. There is a darker shadow, there's a less dark shadow, so I kind of pay attention to that. Let me, before, you see, before, so if you look at this area, before, after, before, or before, after, you see. So when it comes to mixing, this is as far as you want your mixing to actually go, to be honest. In fact, some people will say this is too far, some will say this is too far, but I mean, usually Usually, oh my god, my laptop is going bonkers. So still mixing, you see, something like this, before, after, you see. All I've just done is just try to blend in that skin. Try to blend in that skin. Make it a little more, but I'm not flattening it. I leave the highlights where the highlights are. And all I'm doing is just slowly, you know, blending it, something like this. Something like this. Just to save time, I'm going to just leave it like this. The forehead is still a mess. You would spend time, you know, the forehead is still a mess. And usually, you know, you'd have kind of cleaned this up from healing. So just to save time, I'm not going to do that in this video. And also, sometimes, not sometimes, you know, when it comes to blemishes and all that, I want to fix that in the high frequency, because you know now I've mixed the low frequency, and that is where the mixer brush ends. On the high layer, you never want to use the mixer brush. On the high layer, on the high frequency, all I want to use healing is the healing brush. And for example, this is a texture, so I come here, healing brush, current layer only. At this point, not current and below, it's current only, and the hardness should also be soft. Then what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to remove the, if there's like pimples, you know, all of that imperfection. Usually they're gonna be on the texture layer, because that was the point of the whole separation. So that, but in this particular image, there's really not so much, you know, blemishes to remove and all that. So, you know, in this one, on this image, there are no pimples that fall on the texture layer. But if they were, the texture layer is where we would fix it, you know, with the spot healing brush. So something like this, you know, high frequency, high frequency for fixing, you know, textures, pimples, blemishes, low frequency for, let me just say that again, the high frequency is for, you know, fixing the textures, blemishes, pimples, anything, you know, that stands out. That's where we fix that. And we've got the color layer. The color layer is just to, you know, put like a very low flow, not necessarily in every photo, but sometimes there is some color shift and color differences in the skin tone. You can use this layer to just kind of fix it, or you could use the saturation in another method to fix it, but that's an option. And the low frequency is where you fix the tones. You see, before, after, before, after. You see that? Before, after. Nothing too crazy, right? So, yes, that's that regarding the frequency separation action. In the following days, I'm going to actually be doing a more detailed video about how I use every single one of these actions, from the, you know, frequency separation to the whiten eyes, to the whiten teeth, to the iris pop, to the camera raw edit, to the sharpen, and to resize for Instagram. To an extent, I think how it's arranged is how the workflow goes. So I start from dodge to burn to usually to my frequency separation, to whiten eyes, to whiten eyes, then make iris pop, you know, whiten teeth. Then I use the dodge and burn also, you know, because sometimes why I separated this dodge and burn from the dodge and burn is sometimes you don't need a dodge and burn layer. Sometimes all you need is just a dodge layer. and sometimes all you need is just a bond layer for different purposes. So that's the reason why we've got dodge and burn, and the reason we've got dodge separately and burn separately, and sharpen. For this kind of image, when I finish doing what I need to do, after all my color grade, after my skin retouch, after my color toning and color grading, sharpen is one of the last things I need to do. I just wanted to, quickly put this out there because a few people have asked me how to use this frequency separation um, action, and I just wanted to quickly put this out there. It's a 16-bit action, so first of all, your image needs to be 16 bits. Like I said earlier, the image needs to be 16 bits before you can use this. If it's not 16 bits, go to image, go to mode, and change it from 8 bit to 16 bits. Then after that, you can use it. So that's that, and if you find this video helpful, and if you have any other questions, just send me a message and I'll be glad to help in any way I can. So yeah, that's that for now. Like I said, frequency separation before after, before after. The skin is still, you know if you look at it, there's still some details. We haven't gone too crazy. Before, after, before, after, before, after. This is not a great job, but just to show an example. All right then, so yeah, that's that for now. All right, thank you for watching, and goodbye.